Thanks everybody for joining. So yes, I would like to invite the panelists to also turn on their cameras and microphones. What I can do, Richard, is start with you and ask you to introduce yourself, a little bit about your role and your background and organization, and then we'll do the same for Alan and Matt, and then hopefully get into the nuts and bolts of the discussion for today.
Good morning, everyone. Yep, my name is Richard Collar. I work for KO Data. We are a UK-based co-location company with a number of data centres, our main one being in Harlow in Essex. We've also got facilities in Slough and future facilities coming up in Manchester. So as a co-location business, we have a variety of customers from banks to sort of cloud-based and sort of some pipeline hyperscalers potentially sort of coming into the business. The business as a whole was formed back in 2014, so relatively young. And in the last sort of 6 years, we have grown exponentially from the single building we had on our Harlow campus to a number of buildings, plus what we mentioned that we got over in Slough. So my role within the business is to actually drive the design and engineering forward and come up with what we require both today and in the future to be relevant to our customers.
Awesome. Thanks, Richard. And I'm sure we'll be drawing on that expertise to understand how you're, AI for design and engineering and build looking forward in just a moment. Matt, are you happy to go next?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Matt George. I'm a Director of Enterprise Strategy at Equinix. Equinix is a global data center provider and interconnection platform. We have 270 data centers globally, 35 countries across the 6 continents. So we've been around now about 26 years. We have about 10,000 customers using our facilities really for digital transformation. In the last, as a whole, in the last 2 years, we've seen a sharp focus and interest on AI, as you would imagine. My role in the company, I've gone through a number of changes here. Been with the company about 11 years. But I deal with a lot of our, what I would call our enterprise customers, the larger customers that are sort of revenue about 250 million and above, on anything in terms of sort of how they are building out their infrastructure. More importantly now, how they are not only building out that infrastructure now, but sort of one eye on the future with the sort of demands of digitization, hybrid cloud, and of course, AI. I suppose pressure on those capabilities.
Awesome, great to meet you, and thanks for having on. And then Alan, can we hear a little bit from you just to finish off the panel?
Okay, thank you. So my name's Alan Stewart-Brown. I'm VP of the EMEA region for Opengear. Opengear has been around the same time as Equinix, I believe, around 27 years now. I've been with the company for 7 years. And Opengear, we don't operate data centers as such, but we are a major supplier to both data centers and edge compute side. Anybody that has a distributed network can make use of what Opengear does. Essentially, we started out, back in the day as a manufacturer of out-of-band devices, so for remediating problems remotely. But as we've evolved, as the company's grown, and it's growing exponentially every year, and particularly with the advent of AI as well, we've moved. We still do what we started off as in terms of remote management and remote remediation in the event of some kind of network outage, but we're doing so much more now, and in particular around automation and around managing some tools that can be used specifically for in the AI data center world. So I'm here more from the network side of the equation, if you like, which is as important because you have to deliver this information and data to the users. So
awesome. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit on the panel today is just to to try and drill down a little bit on what we mean by AI, on the different types of AI, and how that has an impact on the data center infrastructure and the networking that's required. And I guess the reason I wanted to start here is because there's an awful lot of industry focus and hype perhaps around some specific subsections of AI. I think probably around things like the need for training of generative AI in particular being the thing that's really discussed, but that's not the whole piece of the puzzle. And it would be wrong, I think, to assume that all AI has data center infrastructure requirements like that. So I wanted to try and throw that out for you guys to hear a little bit about what you're understanding and categorizing and seeing in the AI market and the different types of data center infrastructure requirements that different types of AI might have. I'm sure you all have something interesting to say on that, so I will just open it up and see who wants to come in.
So
Go on. So here you go. So I'll sort of break it down. So just go back to Equinix. We're not the way I would describe our role in AI. We're not an AI company. We are an AI enabler. So companies are using our platform to really develop their AI for their sort of use cases. And I'll divide this into two ways. There's sort of the public, what I would call public AI, and there's private AI. The private AI will have more of an effect on the infrastructure because public effectively is where companies can connect to all of the cloud providers and some of the specialist AI providers that are within Equinix and run their AI models that way. Effectively, that's sort of moving the data to the model in that instance and doesn't require them to have huge amounts of infrastructure, its connections. All of the cloud providers have some form of AI service. Now, when you flip it the other way, which I think is more interesting and more challenging, is where companies want to build out private AI. So that is where they are looking at infrastructure for their own capabilities themselves, or you have specialist AI providers that are deploying large-scale infrastructure within data center providers to offer that service onward to end-user customers. So those are the two areas we are seeing. I would say that if I look at sort of numbers across our, we would class all of our data centers as AI ready. I think I was listening to some of the comments earlier, and that was a term that seemed to be sort of used a lot. And within that's 270 plus data centers, and with 100 of those, we have got specialized liquid cooling deployments, and that's going to increase more and more because one of the key things that affects infrastructure is obviously the heat that is required and how we manage that heat. So it largely depends on how that market is shifting towards those two areas. I'll let the other panel sort of members dig in, and I'll come back and maybe talk specifically about industries and what we're seeing there a bit later.
Yeah, I would say from a design and engineering perspective, especially for a co-location company like KO, we have to be relevant to every sector in the market. So you've got the enterprise cloud and the AI, and the difficult thing to determine at the moment is what exactly is AI in terms of actual power density. There is suggestions that it can go up to 132 kilowatt a rack and even higher, but the number of deployments at present that's actually got that is sort of far and few between. It's a sort of growing market. And when we sort of look back over probably the 5-year span of sort of speaking about AI, the sort of market is slowly sort of maturing. But when we are sort of designing data centers, it becomes quite a challenge to determine what we actually need to provide in terms of gross footprint for a potential customer that we don't actually know who that will be at the end, and how we would facilitate that customer within the space. As Matt quite rightly said, liquid cooling is the way forward, and that's something that we are at KO Data embracing with our reference design. It will be, and I think across many of the industry, a hybrid solution where you'd have car or fan wall deployments for the traditional air-cooled part of deployment, and then dedicated circuits off the same chilled water loop that then provides connections to CDUs for cold plate or submerged cooling. It has to be completely flexible to ensure that it is, as mentioned previously, relevant to each and every one of the customers that will sort of arrive at our facility. So the densities on each technical suite suddenly starts to increase to fulfill this sort of a new requirement. But it becomes quite a challenge to cut a balance between the capital expenditure and the need to try and look forward for a building that has a lifespan of 25 to 50 years, and plants that, even when you look at life cycle, you know, major chiller plant and generators are a good sort of 25 years plus before you really want to start changing that infrastructure. So it has to be the right solution now put in place. I'll pass over to Alex if you sort of got anything to add on that.
No, that's interesting to hear when you're talking about, you know, when you're building a data center, you're thinking about a 50-year life cycle for the building, etc. I guess what we all have to remember is that we're at the very beginning of this journey. You think about it, you know, even 3 years ago, the general public weren't talking about AI. You know, if you think about even 3 months ago when, you know, DeepSeek ended up in the news, and suddenly the whole thing, you know, kicked off. It's interesting. I was reading a stat this morning about actually the percentage of data centers or data center usage for AI. I mean, there's lots of talk about power usage, energy usage, and all those good things, which are clearly technical challenges for the data center designers. But still, AI represents a small percentage of overall data center usage. I mean, it is just a small percentage. So, yeah, I think a lot of the challenges ahead of us are still to be discovered right now. When people really, you know, make a move towards using AI in earnest. From the experience that I have of meeting our customers, and we have some of the world's largest hyperscaler AI companies out there. I'm not allowed to name them, but you can guess they're in the kind of top 10. You know, that are spending literally billions of dollars on build out. Right now, they're not necessarily seeing the demand for the, you know, the amount of infrastructure that they're building. So that will come, though. As I say, we're at the beginning of this journey, and from Opengear's perspective, we're here to support the other side on the data side, and the management of the data between the folks that are using public cloud, for instance, or public AI data centers, making sure that their infrastructure doesn't become a bottleneck because of the amount of, you know, data that this is generating. So,
yeah, to add on that, Alan, you know, I've literally just walked out of a customer meeting, and they're sort of looking at potential deploying at KO Data. So I can't go into who the customer is, but the whole roadmap that they've got at the moment, similar to what you're saying, is the next 2 to 3 years. They're still saying air cooled, maybe up to 20 kilowatt rack. Then in the future, when what they're casting as sort of 5 years, then they're very much looking at a hybrid liquid cooled solution. So even the sort of customers and end users, because I think this is typical to what I'm hearing from the meetings I'm having with respective companies want to come into the business, that they've got this sort of roadmap, but at the moment it's still very much fixed within the air-cooled low-density racks with a future ambition to get to that AI.
And I think the point that you guys are making, which is interesting, is this idea that, you know, infrastructure investments and the way that you design and plan a data center and you purchase the, you know, the cooling equipment and so on and so forth, that tends to happen on a significantly slower investment cycle than what we're currently seeing as kind of the, you know, the 6-monthly NVIDIA new chip AI innovation cycle. And that mismatch makes a challenge because on the one hand, you can look to build very flexibly and with the specifications of the future in mind. But I think, Richard, what's underneath some of what you're saying is also that challenge to say, you know, customers don't want to pay today for something they don't need today, that there has to be a balance there. Putting in, you know, all of the plumbing for liquid cooling comes at an expense. And so it feels as though what you're all describing is this need to have a bit of a balance between, you know, looking to the future and thinking about the requirements, the expected requirements of AI in the future, but also with a, you know, healthy dose of reality about what customers are looking for today. And most of the time, I think you guys were talking more about enterprise customers, although I know that, you know, Equinix at least and Opengear, you guys serve the hyperscalers as customers as well, and perhaps things would look a little bit different in terms of their requirements and their immediate needs in this space.
So I think it's, if I could pick up on a point there and something Alan was saying, so it's the sort of power availability constraints at the moment is not just being driven by AI, it's being driven by a huge, you know, move towards digitization generally. So not everybody is building just for AI. They're actually building, you know, to combat things like an aging grid, the impact of everything moving towards, you know, digital delivery. And AI is just sort of overlaid on top of that. Alan's point about, yeah, if you were to look at our customer base, how many truly have got AI, you know, driven ROI cases? It's a minority, but there are some what we would call digital leaders out there. You know, to give you, I always like giving you some real examples. So you have got two extremes. You have got the real digital leaders. We've got in one of our, again, can't name the company, but I'm sure Richard appreciates Slough is the sort of, you know, data center capital of the world in the UK. So we've got facilities up in Slough. We have a liquid cooling facility up in Slough. And we have you know, investment management firm up there. And I was just reading, you know, what they did to sort of move from what is sort of standard infrastructure to AI infrastructure. So if previously, you know, their footprint now is spread over sort of 3 cabinets, which are liquid cooled. In the old world, that would need at least 20 racks or 20 cabinets to be able to deliver the same performance that they need. So they have shifted from, they were working with public cloud AI. So as you say, they were accessing the hyperscalers to get their AI. But there comes a tipping point when they are now so advanced that it isn't practical to run it that way. So they have to have infrastructure that will support their needs going forward. But you go to the other end of the scale, where you've still got companies that are, you know, running their own enterprise data centers on their premises. And they are trying to look at, well, how can they cope with AI and the demand? It's going to be very, very difficult if they don't make that infrastructure change at some point. So there's a balance, and we even have, you know, companies, I wouldn't use the term fighting for capacity, but there are some general concerns with large customers that they need to reserve space because of what's happening in the future, which is actually bringing projects forward. So there's a real sort of balance, tipping point, whatever you want to call it, that is playing out in, you know, some big decisions with our global customers.
Sorry.
Go. Go ahead.
I was going to say just one thing, just anecdotally. I get to talk to lots of CIOs and CSOs in different industries and different verticals. One thing that I have noticed is, not so much in the really big enterprise type organizations, but in the sort of next tier down in SMEs, is that these companies are still trying to figure out how to use AI themselves. They intuitively know that they need to do it, and they can't be a laggard because that will affect their business. AI is a real opportunity for them. They know that, but they're just figuring out how to really use it for good and to be able to demonstrate an ROI. And then the other thing is that often there's different silos within the organization of different people. So you've got, different folks that maybe in the IT business, who in the IT side of things, that have a different view to the CSO versus maybe a dedicated team of AI developers potentially. And there's still seems to be there's no overall control in a lot of these mid-sized companies, and that's slowing down their adoption of this. But they'll figure it out. As we started out, that we're at the beginning of the journey, and everyone understands the genie's out of the bottle. It's not going back in, and it's a force for good if they get on with it and figure out how it works in their specific business, because it's not one size fits all.
Yeah, I'd sort of answer on that to say I've worked with sort of many of the hyperscalers, and even the feedback we get when we sort of ask them what they would like, there is different answers from different people in the same business, because they haven't quite worked out what the standard is that they need for their Mac deployments. And there is a lot of churn in what they class as their playbooks to sort of demonstrate a system that they want to move forward with. And that then causes sort of confusion sort of with the industry, because you're trying to second guess what is relevant to that particular customer to offer them the right product.
Yeah, so there's sort of a whole load of challenges here, some of which are, kind of infrastructure related. How do you get the right specs in for the infrastructure that you need? And then there's a lot of challenges that I think you're gesturing towards, all of you, which is about enterprises understanding and defining their AI strategy and mitigating some of the challenges, some of which might be infrastructure related, but a lot of which will be things like, their data strategy and, and their compliance and risk strategy and so on and so forth, which really ties into, to how they then think about how much infrastructure they need, when, for what use cases, and so on and so forth.
Well, certainly in certain industries, there's differences. So if you look at the financial sector, for example, which is heavily regulated, there was a great article, I think, last week. The CTO of JP Morgan was talking about this sort of, desire to rush headfirst into AI for fear of being left behind. His concern was that, security protocols were being, pushed aside. There was, since, I think, I'm just seeing it, he was saying that since AI adoption, vulnerabilities have increased threefold. We're seeing, in other sectors, cyber attacks happening. There's got to be consideration. He was sort of saying, let's sort of understand a bit more about what we want AI to do and how we're going to use it. And certainly when we look at use cases for AI across different sectors, I would say the financial services sector are adopting AI, but it's very much sort of back of house. It's in terms of running their policies, their procedures. How can they utilize it, not customer facing, because there's another set of governance that they have to go through. And other industries, for example, like healthcare, are deploying it very effectively but they're in specific controlled environments. So healthcare, for example, are using AI to speed up diagnostics and testings, et cetera, and that's very valuable. But I think there has to be, a pretty defined process. Alan's point about company setup, it's like anything. You've got teams that are sort of siloed within the same organization, and they need to be talking to each other to build out that full AI strategy, because fundamentally what underpins AI isn't technology, it's use of data. Where does it reside? What do I want to do with it? How am I going to move it? How am I going to control it? So there's a lot of conversations that need to go ahead.
And to probably enhance on that, I think those conversations, when you're looking at design and engineering, needs to be a joined up thinking, right from the sort of concept right down to the actual equipment manufacturer. Because in terms of co-location, you often hand off at the point of power distribution and cooling within to the space. But with AI and wanting to have liquid cooling directly to the chips, that means you get much closer as a colo to the actual piece of equipment, and temperatures, electrical requirements, etc., become much more important. And off the back of that, also CFDs need to be more accurate to ensure that the environment is correct for that. So traditionally, where the handoff used to happen and the customer used to just bring their equipment in, that there now needs to be joined up thinking to ensure that the equipment is installed in the right position within the space to maximize its productivity and not suffer from the environment.
And I know, Matt, you guys at Equinix have an AI infrastructure checklist that you're encouraging customers to use, or you're using as well.
Yeah.
I wonder how many of those points that that Richard had just mentioned and that Alan mentioned too are on that list. It would be helpful maybe just to give a quick summary and to tell us if we've missed anything off from the discussion so far that's you think is particularly prescient for those thinking about their kind of their AI infrastructure needs.
There is one thing I will draw on, but I think yes, the design and the scalability, I think we've touched on. We talked about power and cooling. The thing that we are seeing, and I talked about it between when you move from public to private, is what we call data and cloud adjacency. Where that data resides, because AI is driven by data, whether it's training or inference. It's like, how are you going to access that data? Where's it going to reside? There's a cost to moving that data. So that's one of the other things. From our point of view, where Equinix differs, I think, as I said, those 270 locations are all interconnected by our own fabric. So what that means, literally, if you're deployed, I'm sitting in our London office at the moment. So if you're deployed in London, you can reach anywhere in the world in milliseconds. So the ability to move AI data and to use it effectively, that's that data management piece. Privacy and security is the other thing as well. Again, falls into the regulatory area. And the balance, I was listening to your previous speaker, I caught the last 10 minutes where she was talking about sustainability. That is a sort of view as well, because you've got these very power hungry servers, and everyone has got the companies we deal with have got very public facing sustainability metrics. So getting that balance between infrastructure that is sustainable and supports their scope 2 and 3 criteria, again, is also on that checklist. And I was interested, I think she was talking about heat expo from data centers. We do that. We generate a lot of heat, and in Paris, little anecdote here, the sort of heat that comes out of one of our Paris locations actually heated the Olympic swimming pool for the games, and now offers heat exchange to support, I think, 10,000 houses in the community. So it's quite far reaching. So it's, but yeah, those are the areas that we look at, those sort of that 5-point checklist.
Really interesting. Does anybody else want to comment on things that maybe we haven't touched upon? I know, Alan, there are some pretty there can be some quite challenging impacts on networking, AI data sets that can be very bursty and demands, and then have very low latency requirements if you're training doing AI training across a number of different servers, and you need to make sure that everything's happening sequentially. Is there anything maybe on the networking side that you would call out specifically as a kind of a new or a unique or a key requirement in when you're running and using AI workloads?
So one thing, and this isn't specific to AI, but it's definitely going to be, become more relevant because of the workloads you talk about for AI and the data movement of data. And that's really the fact that when we our best practice suggestions to our customers is that you don't use your production network to manage your production network. So it's this idea of using an independent management plane, or sometimes it's known as an EMEA, independent management interface, so that for the network administrators and the people that are involved in that side of the business, they manage their infrastructure, their network infrastructure, whether that's a data center, a colo, some edge compute site, or whatever it is, in a distributed way, that they manage that through traditionally an out-of-band plane, so that if there is any kind of interruption, they still have control. And this comes back to the security side of things as well. We've seen some huge cybersecurity hacks going on in retail just this last week in the UK. And one of the things that saved one of the retailers a lot of time and money was the fact that they were able to segment their network, because they were able to basically close down parts of the network so that the infected part couldn't, move the malware elsewhere into the rest of the network. So they were able to, provide some isolation, and they were only able to do that because they were managing the network through an independent plane. So, it's a best practice thing. We promote it, and I think with as AI really takes off, and we move from people using generative AI into agentic AI, which is really going to be the game changer, it will become more and more important that companies and organizations look at the whole infrastructure, not just the data center, but their networking capability as well, and make sure, and it will become as important as the security element.
Really interesting. Maybe we're just running out of time, and maybe Richard, to wrap up, it would be interesting to hear what, in some ways, what we're trying to talk about on this panel is, what is your biggest headache at the moment when you're thinking about the design and the engineering of KO, and existing sites and future sites that you might look to break ground on? What's the thing that's keeping you up at night when you think about the workloads that might be coming down the road?
I think Matt sort of mentioned it earlier in terms of grid. So it really comes down to power. We are, as a company, fortunate that we have the power already allocated for our campus. But at the moment, there is a lot of churn within NESO, which is part of National Grid, in terms of who's in the power queues, how quickly you can get the power. There's a major upgrade meant to be sort of happening across the country, which we're talking dates coming up into 2029, 2030, maybe 2031. And I think the increase in compute requirement, i.e. for co-locations, because of AI, so there was already a growth there, and this growth has just taken off in terms of power requirement for AI. Means that power is going to be required in the locations that we need sort of data centers, which is normally around AZ zones, for especially for the hyperscalers, etc. And that sets us a real big challenge, because we can build, we can design, we can get planning permission. What you can't do is get your power, or you can get your power in principle and you get a date that is unrealistic. And it really does affect us in the UK, but similarly in Europe, it's still a sort of a power issue, especially when you look at the problems they've had in Spain. There's certain ideas of why that actually occurred. Part of it could be down to too much green generation, so there's not enough inertia in the grid. So we have to solve the power issue to allow us to develop the data centers in the locations that we actually need them to then solve the AI problem.
That makes a lot of sense, and I guess it means a lot of coordination between you guys and and electricity suppliers and those looking at how to.
It's a major government conversation,
Yeah.
not just in the UK, as Richard says. In the Netherlands, they've got severe challenges. So yeah, we are building where there will be power as opposed to where there is land, I'd say.
On that note, I think we're at the end of our time, but I just wanted to thank all three of you for your excellent contributions and for sharing so openly with all the audience what you're looking at and what you're seeing from an AI perspective. I know it's a market that's moving fast, so it's difficult to give hard and fast answers on some of this stuff, but really appreciate you all taking part.